You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
As I've mentioned many times before, I was a high school science teacher for 30 years. And here in New York State, every public school student to graduate must pass a series of exams they call Regents exams, and they cover the usual core subjects, science, math, English, and social studies. But at the school where I taught, that was Chatham High School in Chatham, New York, there was one additional requirement to graduate, and that is that every senior had to complete what was known as a senior exhibition. And yes, I am old enough to have been part of the original team of teachers who created that senior exhibition back in 1993. Well, it's evolved over the years. The basic concept has always remained the same. What happens is that seniors will choose a topic that interests them, they conduct research, they work with an advisor, which is typically a teacher, they also consult an expert in the field, and then they present, yes, they do stand up in front of the room, and they present what they've learned before a panel that's made up of mostly teachers. I'm betting that over the course of my career, I sat through well over 100 of these presentations, maybe even more, closer to 150, because there were so many more students in the school years ago. But what always impressed me was that every student, regardless of whether they're outgoing or painfully shy, whether they're academically strong or struggling, they somehow rose to the occasion. And without a doubt, quite a few of them delivered presentations that were genuinely outstanding. I truly was impressed. In fact, looking back, I'd say there's only one presentation that was so bad that I walked straight out of the room when the kid was done, and I told the teachers in charge to make sure that that kid failed. There was no way he deserved to pass. So let me describe what he did. His topic was urban legends. First, he spent a couple of minutes, and I have to say a couple of minutes is generous on my part. He spent a couple of minutes explaining what an urban legend was. Then he played a lengthy clip from the movie Urban Legend, and this was carefully timed so that the total length of the presentation would meet the minimum time requirement. I think that was around 13 minutes or so. And when the clip ended, he simply said, "And that's what an urban legend is." That was his entire presentation that he supposedly spent months working on. Now, I should point out that failing the exhibition didn't prevent a student from graduating. It simply meant they needed to go back, do more work, and do a presentation at a later date. And yes, that student did graduate. As I was researching today's story, though, another senior exhibition came to mind, and I should point out that it's one that I never saw. A student in my physics class had chosen the topic of the Free the Nipple campaign, and if you don't know about that, that's a movement that advocates allowing women to go shirtless in public, just as men can do, without facing harassment or judgment. I should point out that she wasn't a troublemaker. It was quite the opposite, actually. She was a good student who simply enjoyed challenging the rules and questioning accepted norms. And for weeks before her presentation, she kept telling me that she planned to end her talk by ripping off her shirt and exposing her breasts. She knew that everyone in the room would be uncomfortable, which is exactly the point that she wanted to make. Of course, being her teacher, I repeatedly urged her not to go through with it. I even warned the teacher supervising her project what she was threatening to do. So you're probably wondering, did she take her top off and free her nipples? Of course not, and even without doing that, I was told that she had an excellent presentation on the topic. Well, today I have a story for you from the late 1960s. It involves a woman who proposed something that by today's standards seems far less controversial than freeing the nipple, but at the time it created quite the stir. She suggested that all 2,200 women working alongside her at General Dynamics in California, that they come to work one Friday not wearing their brasiers. She called it Braless Fridays. I am Steve Silverman, and this is the Useless Information Podcast.
Useless information.
For someone like me who spends a lot of time researching these lesser-known stories, there are some stories and images that just keep getting reposted online over and over again. Of course, they usually share because there's something unusual, quirky, or just a little sexually suggestive about them. And there's one image in particular that's crossed my path many times. It was taken on August 1st, 1969 outside a San Francisco department store, and it shows a young secretary named Shelley Drake standing on a platform, and she's triumphantly holding her bra high above her head. And behind her is a crowd of hundreds of men, and as far as I can tell, there's just one other woman there. It's kind of an odd scene because it's not clear what all these men expected to see. Shelley is standing there fully clothed, holding her bra high up in the air. Where the guys are, they are seeing her fully clothed back. They couldn't see anything. And over the years, each time this photograph is reproduced, there's usually some mention of this being a symbol of the women's liberation movement and the fight for equality. And while women certainly were challenging traditional expectations, demanding equal rights in the late 1960s, a little digging reveals that the men gathered around Shelley, they probably weren't there to support the cause of women's liberation at all. An advertisement in the July 31st, 1969 edition of the San Francisco Chronicle announced the event. Let me read it to you. Quote, "Mail coupon. Women feel free, demonstrate. Anti-bra day. Turn in your bras. Friday, August 1st, 12 noon. Financial District, corner of Montgomery and Pine. Mail your bras to the Condor, 300 Columbus Avenue, San Francisco, California, 94133. Unquote. At the time that Shelley Drake's picture hit the news wires, it was reported that over 200 bras had already been mailed in for destruction, and they range in size from 32B to 52DD, as if it really matters. Now, after reading that, I wondered, what was the Condor, an equal rights organization, a newspaper? Well, it turns out it was none of those. A historical marker on the building, I think, explains it all. Quote, "The Condor, where it all began. Topless and bottomless entertainment. Topless, June 19th, 1964. Bottomless, September 3rd, 1969. Starring Ms. Carol Doda, San Francisco, California." Unquote. Yes, you heard that right. The sponsor of the Anti-Bra Day was a strip club, and women, they were encouraged to come and throw their brasiers into a garbage can. Well, the publicity stunt actually worked. Some 5,000 men packed the area to get a glimpse of the women disposing of their brasiers. The problem was that few women showed up for the event, and of those that did, it's reported that they were all professional topless dancers, and of course the one exception, if it's true, was Shelley Drake. A story like Anti-Bra Day is the type that appears in the newspaper one day and of course is forgotten by the next. But as the old expression goes, sex sells. It's also not the story that I set out to tell. Instead, my focus is on another story that occurred during the same month, but my hunch, and I really have no proof of this, is that the publicity of the Anti-Bra Day may have inspired the story I'm about to tell you. Let me introduce you to Mrs. Jane Andre. In 1969, she was a 39-year-old divorcee with a 20-year-old son. As the very first woman with a bachelor's degree in welding engineering in the United States, Jane had secured a job with General Dynamics in Pomona, California. Her salary back then was $18,000 a year, which doesn't sound like much, but that's roughly $164,000 per year adjusted for inflation. At least on the surface, she had achieved much of what the women's liberation sought, a professional job, an excellent salary, and her independence from men. But all of that would come crashing down on Thursday, August 14th of 1969. You see, after reading about the national braless trend in the newspaper, she suggested that the women at the Pomona plant do the same thing.
I saw this newspaper story and I happened to mention during the coffee break that I thought it was a practical idea. I didn't intend to be a crusade, it was just a humorous little thing. We girls were joking about it and I said, let's pass the word that Friday is no bra day. One of the girls in the union heard about it and she thought they should get behind it, so she told the union stewardess to pass the word.
Little side note is that they were all members of the International Association of Machinists. Well, around noon that day, Jane was called on the carpet. Her immediate supervisor, a guy named Joe Till, he requested that she meet with him immediately. Apparently, he had spoken earlier with a woman who worked under her, and she told him that Jane was the mastermind of Braless Friday. He then informed Jane that her Braless Friday plan would cost the company a significant amount of man-hours. That's because the male workers, they'd be unable to stop staring at the women's chests.
I told him men have been staring at women for centuries, and they will continue to stare at women, braless or not.
What did Till do? He fired her. Why? For, quote, conduct unbecoming a member of management, unquote.
I was shocked that something like this would happen to a professional person like me. At first, I thought he was kidding. I couldn't believe upper management would fire someone on hearsay.
While Jane wouldn't be there the next day to join in, many were curious to see how many women would take part in Braless Friday. And probably out of fear for their own jobs, very few women dared to do so. A General Dynamics spokesman said,
"We don't know of anyone working without their bras."
As you could probably guess, it didn't take long for her story to blow up in the press, and they had a field day with the headlines. Here are just a few that I wrote down. Actually, I have 5 of them to share with you. Bra protest gets little support. Women's protest against bras called a bust. Flunked ABC. Or how about Braless Friday is her undoing, and finally Braless plan leaves her flat. And if you think headlines have gotten better over the years, think again. Just about 5-6 weeks ago, our local Hooters restaurant went out of business, and our local Albany newspaper had the headline, Hooters Sports Bar Goes Bust. Anyway, to make matters worse for Jane Andre, nearly every newspaper story dutifully included her measurements, which were 39, 29, 43. To be honest, it really doesn't put much of an image in my mind, but it does raise an interesting question. I mean, did she volunteer those measurements, or did someone actually take them after the story made the press? Or my hunch is that some reporter simply invented them. She told the press,
Brassieres are not reasonable garments. They're non-functional and uncomfortable, so I don't wear them. I haven't worn a bra during my non-working hours for the past 20 years. I wore one to work most of the time because it's considered part of normal dress. But I don't wear one with dresses that are designed so you can't tell the difference. I wasn't wearing a bra the day it happened. I'm a big-boned woman, and because of the way I'm built, I just look average. When more women see how good it feels to go braless, they'll really let go.
When questioned, Jack Sloan, the director of public relations for the company, he confirmed that Miss Andre had in fact been dismissed.
She was hired as a supervisor 3 months ago to work, not to talk to other women into doing something like this.
To which Jane responded,
I was told I violated no dress code, but just that society in the Panoma area would not accept the braless fad, and that for a woman in my position, this was considered improper behavior.
Of course, the 20th century has seen a big change in women's fashion. Gone are the tight corsets, the garter belts. Do you remember the bullet bras? Well, some wondered if the brassiere could be the next undergarment to get the heave-ho, and of course the members of the press, they sought answers. Now, we have the advantage of living 57 years in the future, so of course we have the benefit of knowing that the brassiere is still with us. But back in 1969, it was estimated that around 250 million brassieres were sold each year in the United States, which roughly worked out to around 3 for every woman that wore one. They interviewed Mrs. Helen Means, who was the executive president and designer for the Bra Fantastic company. She said,
It's nothing but a fad. I don't see any evidence of a great swing away from bras. Some of the younger girls, of course, are making a big thing of it, but as I say, they're young. Teenagers are in their early 20s.
Its sales, they were definitely falling off. Typically, the sales of brassieres increased by 5% annually, but they had fallen to 1% in 1969. In a World News Service, or WNS syndicated story, the article's author asked, quote, who among us can sit unconcerned on the sidelines and watch a major industry like brassiere manufacturing suddenly droop like this, unquote. While it was General Dynamics who was in the news for Miss Andre's dismissal, reporters also questioned other businesses as to how they would deal with the same situation. For example, a spokesman for one of California's largest banks, unnamed of course, said the company had no interest in hiring a woman who showed up for an interview without a bra. And if a female employee made a habit of coming to work braless, she would be fired, he said.
Appearance-wise, women look better in bras. The customers coming in, especially at the branches, would get upset if they saw their funds being handled by people of this type.
But a spokesman for an oil company looked at the situation differently.
Some people would turn their heads to look at the girls, but then they'd do that anyway. Mini skirts, beards, anything else, we don't involve ourselves in it. If people are clean, observe regular hours, and conduct themselves with decorum, it wouldn't matter.
And then there was an insurance company, also unnamed, that took a middle-of-the-road approach.
We would go towards the ones who wear the bras. It's fashionable. It's business ethics, proper business attire. It's not improper not to wear one, but it's more proper to do it.
A Standard Oil of California representative told a reporter,
"We don't give a damn what they wear so long as they are reasonably well groomed and do their work."
Then there was the age-old question as to whether there were any health benefits to wearing or not wearing a bra. A group of women's doctors, probably all male, at the University of California discussed it and concluded,
"We all feel it doesn't make any difference to physical health."
All of this debate kept the story alive in the newspapers far longer than it probably deserved. But amid all the arguments, one important fact was being overlooked, and that was that Jane Andre, she was still unemployed. She had registered with an employment agency, but all the publicity that surrounded her dismissal was almost certainly hurting her chances of finding a new job. And that's because few employers were likely to hire someone whose firing had become front-page news. Do you smell a lawsuit coming? Well, on Tuesday, September 2nd, in 1969, Los Angeles attorney Robert K. Steinberg filed a $1.25 million, which is around $11.4 million today, lawsuit against General Dynamics and three of its company officials. They were Jack Sloan, Director of Public Relations, Jack Mason, Vice President in charge of operations, and of course Joe Till, Miss Andre's supervisor. In the suit, Steinberg argued that company officials, through newspaper interviews that they gave, implied that Jane Andre was a woman of low moral standing and that she was fired because she had, quote, committed the crime of refusing to wear a brassiere and inviting others to do the same, unquote. Now, I will tell you how that turned out in a bit, but I want to tell you about Friday, September 5th of 1969. This is just 3 days after she filed her lawsuit. That's when two more Braless Friday events took place in Chicago, and the two of them were just 2 blocks from one another. The first was the brainchild of WCFL disc jockey Clark Weber, and he invited women to come to the Marina City Plaza and toss their brassieres into a barrel. Well, approximately 2,000 men, they showed up to watch about a dozen women do so. But the press pointed out that since none of the bras were removed on the spot, the women did so off-site, there were no reported arrests for indecency. Then, about 2 blocks away, 27-year-old Chicago architect William Baldwin, he staged another braless event. With 500 men looking on, 3 women, they stood on the Michigan Avenue Bridge and they got ready to toss their bras into the river below. But just as they were about to let go, Stanley Whitebloom, who was Chicago's chief pollution control officer for the Metropolitan Sanitary District, he warned the women not to do so.
Girls, I'm not kidding. You're going to be in violation if you do it.
Well, his warnings fell on deaf ears. 20-year-old Sandy Coe let go of a 36D brassiere and it fell to the river below. Barbara Stratton, also 20, did the same thing, stating,
"It's a real freedom feeling."
True to his word, Whitebloom issued citations to all 3 of the women for polluting the river. And just to be fair, he issued a 4th citation to William Baldwin. Another Braless Friday event took place on September 19th of 1969 in Cedar Falls on the University of Northern Iowa campus. This event was the idea of 4 undergraduate women who declined to be identified in the press. One of them did, however, act as a spokeswoman for the group and said,
"If my parents found that I was in on this, my dad would understand and laugh about it. But my mother, well, you've heard of the generation gap."
She said that it originally started as a hoax, and the 4 thought it would be fun to spread a big rumor about it around the campus.
After we thought more about it, though, we decided it would be nice to get people on campus together for something that was fun and harmless. It seems there's so much argument on campus these days, on the Vietnam War, for instance, that there is a need to draw together for something that's fun. We're sick of bickering.
About a week prior to the big event, they prepared about 2,500 flyers and passed them out in the dormitories. The message to the boys was, quote, "Is your girl uptight and irritable? Throw your support to Braless Friday Relief Rally, Prexy, September 19th, 10 p.m., Patty." The female flyer was a bit different and began, "Are you uptight? Bust out." It was reported that a significant number of women had agreed not to wear their bras for an entire day, but what they did instead is they went to their classes wearing sweatshirts and jeans. Then, that evening, approximately 2,500 students gathered at Prexy's Pond, just as planned, and they listened to music, and I'm just filling in the blanks here, they most likely consumed large quantities of alcohol and whatever else. In November 1969, it was announced that Jane Andre, the woman who had launched the Braless Fridays movement, she had written a book about her experience. She titled it Tempest in a Sea Cup. And although that same title was later used for a 1993 episode of NYPD Blue, I could find no evidence that her book was ever published. Meanwhile, Jane continued to pursue her lawsuit against General Dynamics. The trial was originally scheduled for May 3, 1971, but was later postponed until May 1st of 1972. But on May 2nd of 1972, the two sides announced that they had reached a settlement. In the end, however, Ms. Andre rejected General Dynamics' settlement offer, and that decision turned out to be a costly mistake. That's because the case was eventually dismissed due to, quote, her failure timely to prosecute, unquote. On September 18th of 1978, Jane was hired by the Bendix Corporation in South Bend, Indiana. She earned a monthly salary of $2,920, which is around $180,000 a year today, and her job was to supervise a production line that was staffed by 74 hourly employees. Now, July 13th of 1979 was an especially hot and humid day, and because the Bendix plant wasn't air-conditioned, Jane chose to wear a terry cloth tank top with double quarter-inch or 6.4 millimeter shoulder straps. But after 2 hourly employees complained about her attire, her supervisor, a guy named Dale Franz, informed her that her top violated the company's dress code. Jane went home, she changed her clothes, and then she returned to work. The following day, however, she arrived wearing another tank top, this one with a round neckline and spaghetti straps. This, of course, led to another confrontation with Franz. Jane argued that many of the hourly employees dressed the same way that she did, but Franz countered that her top was unsafe and that supervisors were expected to wear collared short-sleeved shirts. Basically, he expected her to dress like all of the male supervisors. Later that day, Jane was fired, and 2 security guards were called in to escort her off the Bendix property. Unbeknownst to her, the company later changed her termination to suspension while a separation committee reviewed the case. But upon meeting, the committee ultimately decided to end her employment, citing, quote, due to inability to perform the duties of her position, unquote. Once again, Jane responded by filing a sex discrimination lawsuit. In 1984, a United States District Court judge ruled in her favor, ordering Bendix to pay her $186,000 in back wages, that's roughly equivalent to a year's salary, and to reinstate her to a comparable position. Bendix appealed, and the case eventually reached the United States Supreme Court. And in 1988, the court ruled against Miss Andre, concluding that there was insufficient evidence that she had been fired because of her sex. I'll bring the story to an end by sharing the Dear Abby advice column that was originally published on January 15th of 1971.
Dear Abby, my very efficient secretary who had been with me for 12 years retired. After several weeks of interviews, our daughter sent a 26-year-old former college friend of hers to apply for the position. Though very plain, she appeared to be personable, competent, and well-groomed, so I hired her. In the past month, she has shown promise of developing into a top-notch secretary. Meanwhile, my wife is furious with my daughter for sending this girl over, and she's angry with me for hiring her. The reason? The girl is welling down and she goes braless. Good secretaries are at a premium, and I mean to keep this one short of breaking up my home. Her going braless doesn't bother me, and besides, I feel it is her business and nobody else's. By the way, our own daughter, who is equally well endowed, goes braless too, and this doesn't bother my wife. Now, what do you think, Abby?
And it's signed No Hanky Panky in Portland.
Dear No Hanky, tell your wife to run the house and to let you run your office. Better a braless secretary than one who's brainless.
Useless, useful, I'll leave that for you to decide. The story of Braless Fridays, the one that you just heard, has been floating around in my collection of possible stories for many, many years. I'm betting close to 15 at this point. And every once in a while, typically once or twice a year, I'd look back through that old stack of fully researched stories, looking for ideas. But each time, for whatever reason, I chose to work on a different story. But then in early July, I was getting ready to go to a family reunion in New Jersey, and after that, my wife Mary Jane and I planned to join up with my cousin Michelle and her family to spend 5 days in New York City, which I have to say was an enjoyable vacation. But in getting ready for the trip, I needed a story to take along. I like to read at night. And I had little time to do any research, so I once again looked through my stack of stories, and I opted to do the one that you just heard. What's interesting is we had a huge storm come through our area last week. In fact, there was record rainfall. So I just finished emailing a listener in Australia, and I told him that I was going to go to the bottom of the hill below our house and check out the creek to see how much water was in there, and then I was going to come back and start recording the podcast. Well, that never happened. Just as I was about to start recording, a tree fell down the road and it took out our power. It was out all day. And I've been recording this podcast for so many years that I know releasing podcast episodes toward the end of the week, particularly on a Friday, is not a good deal. You'll get very few downloads. So I decided to wait until after the weekend to release the story. So I decided to use my time to see if I could definitively figure out when Jane Andre passed away. And while I'm not 100% certain, I believe that she died on June 22nd, 1999 at the age of 69. But as I said, I'm not 100% sure there. But what's interesting in trying to track that detail down, I uncovered that second lawsuit that she filed against the Bendix Corporation for sexual harassment. So I guess you could say that the power outage helped me to write a more complete story. Anyway, just a reminder that the Useless Information Podcast is proud to be part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. So be sure to visit airwavemedia.com to explore their ever-growing collection of some of the very, very best podcasts out there. As always, thanks for listening and take care, everyone. Bye.